TheFarms.com Wheat Report is brought to you by Altitude FX and BASF Canada.
Hi, my name is Chris Churko. I'm the product manager for cereals and bulk seed with Viterra. I've been asked today to talk a little bit about selecting a variety for your farm and how to go about doing that. The reality is we're all looking for the same thing in a variety: top yield, resistance to every disease, high protein, high grades, standability. Burst the bubble right out of the gates. The reality is it doesn't exist. Really, breeding and variety selection is a bit of a game of give and take. It's really about accepting that genetics or your net result from genetics are really a result of environment and management, and those three things have to come together to create the highest yield and create the best grade. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I would go about selecting a variety. Really, the best variety or the right variety for your farm is about selecting a variety that has the highest probability of giving you those best results year over year. It's not going to be every year. The reality in Canada, genetic diversity among varieties is fairly narrow, and really on any given year that environment can take a low yield potential variety and turn it into the best yielding variety on your farm. So my suggestion in terms of looking for a variety: take those seed guides, take the information you're hearing from your neighbors and put them all aside and don't look at them yet. Sit down, pull out a pen and paper, and make a list. Think about your farm, think about your fields, weed pressures, think about things you've been unhappy with in terms of your current variety or things you'd like to improve upon. Make that list, sit and think about it a while and prioritize. Limit that list down to about 3 or 4 things that really matter to you. Take that list, and only then, once you have it, do you open up those seed guides and take a look at some of the data. Take that data with a bit of caution and don't just go to one source. Seed guides are excellent for things like disease rating, standability, days to maturity, things like that. Yield data in seed guides isn't really the best, and it's because it's not common site, common year data. It's really a collection of data over a number of years. What you can do in a seed guide is compare a variety to a check, but you really can't compare a variety to another variety that isn't the check. One of the things we do at Viterra, we run Western Canada's largest testing program for cereals. Every year we run about 25 sites with 25 varieties, replicated 3 times. One of the great things about that is because we are taking all the varieties we have in our seed guide and comparing them in the same year at the same site, they are subjected to the same environment and the same management decisions. So you can actually compare one variety to another directly. We take all of that data, we put it into our seed guide by province, so you can look at that data. So when you've got those books open and you're taking a look at them, pull out that list and cover up the yield numbers. Again, I'd already mentioned that one variety can beat another on any given day, given the environment. Cover up the yield numbers and take a look in that list for all the other factors that you wrote down. If you're highly motivated, you've got a field that's fairly dirty, or it's got some weed pressures, or you want to rotate some chemistry, Clearfield might be the right way to go. One of the things we do in our seed guide is we actually break varieties into segments. We take varieties that are fairly similar to one another. What I anticipate being the top 4 or 5 key drivers outside of yield and quality that you might want to look at in terms of varieties, and we break them out and we group them in our seed guide that way so you can quickly kind of limit the field. There's somewhere around 70 odd registered varieties, so by doing that and creating those segments, we can get you down to 3 or 4 or 5 fairly quick. So if weed pressure is one of your issues, you can look at a Clearfield variety. If you go into our seed guide, you'll see a variety like CDC Abound, which offers early maturity, nice solid standability, and growers in Alberta will see it's among the top yielding. Growers in Saskatchewan might look at something like CDC Thrive, which gives them some high protein levels, some early maturity, and again, a pretty solid yield package there. Growers in Manitoba will see 5604 HRCL, offers them, again, high yields, very good disease package, strong FHB ratings. So if Clearfield's an option, you got a lot of lists in our manual. Compare that data to the seed guides, the provincial seed guides. Generally speaking, our data matches up reasonably well. Don't stay on one source. Some of the other segments we have in there is fusarium resistance. Clearly that's becoming a fairly big issue for everyone. So again, we have a number of varieties listed there that are very strong for fusarium. You'll see our 5600 series of wheat, 5602. You'll see Carberry in there. Again, that limits the field. One of the interesting things is if you're really looking for strong resistance to a disease, or you're really looking for early maturity, when you have one of those varieties that lead the pack in one of those areas, what you generally have to do is give up in other areas. For example, I'll use 5602, very strong, one of the first MR rated for FHP. It actually shows lower midge damage, but standability as you go west isn't fantastic. So that, you can see that in our seed guide. One of the other segments in there, midge tolerance. One of the nice things about our guide, and again seed guides as well, is when you're looking for those strong pieces of information off your list, you can also look and see where it's weak. So you can anticipate what management decisions you're going to have to make or you should be watching for. Other segments, conventional. That's probably the biggest group that we have in our seed guide, and really probably covers the most seeded acreage in Western Canada. What I look at those varieties, conventional varieties, what I see them doing really is that they're strong across the board. They're not a leader for fusarium. They're not a leader for standability or any other. But they're just a solid variety that will weather the storm, so to speak, in any given year. A couple I can give, for example, CDC Stanley, which has really become our flagship variety. Very good standability. It's actually been the highest yielding variety in our common site, common year tests for about 5 years now. And it probably has one of the best general leaf spotting resistance I've ever seen in a variety. It stays green. One of the interesting things about that variety that you can look for is it actually heads later. While it doesn't give up on yield, it heads later than most varieties. Even though last year was a very tough year for fusarium, it was probably the best variety we saw in our own seed production, and that's simply because it missed that disease pressure. Another variety that we're launching next year is CDC VR Morris. It really is very similar to Stanley, yields the same. It's one of the top yielding in our common site, common year trials. What's interesting about that one is you've actually managed to bring in a fairly good fusarium resistance and still maintain that yield, which doesn't always happen. There's a lot of variety, a lot of choice out there. Again, take the opportunity to look at our seed guide, do look at provincial seed guides, and use all that data to bring it back together. But before you start looking, really make sure you have that list before you've talked to your neighbor, before you've heard a name on the radio. Come up with that list that's right for your farm. It may not be the right variety for your neighbor. It all depends on your management. Have that list. Make sure you cover up those yield numbers because they don't mean as much if you haven't looked after really what's limiting your production on your farm. And once you've got that list, you've limited it down to a few, make sure you experiment a little bit. Truthfully, the best variety selection or the process for your farm isn't one variety. It's probably 2 or 3. If you want to mitigate risk and spread it out, you really should be picking 2 or 3 varieties. Picking one that might be later maturing. Quite frankly, a later maturing variety is probably the highest yielding potential out there. The longer it flowers, the more it's going to yield. Pick some early ones to maybe try and beat the heat, beat some disease pressures in summer. If you mix those up on your farm and match those up to the right piece of land on your farm, that's probably on a long-term basis where you're the furthest ahead.
The Farms.com Wheat Report has been brought to you by Altitude FX and BASF Canada. Visit www.clearfield.ca/wheat for more cereal solutions.